Can I borrow your mom for today? Sophia stopped walking. She turned around slowly and looked at the small boy standing behind her on the school field. He was Korean, maybe 7 or 8 years old, with neat black hair combed carefully to the side and a school uniform so perfectly pressed it looked like someone had ironed it twice. He was holding the straps of his backpack with both hands and looking at her with the specific directness of a child who has decided to ask something and is committed to the asking. Sophia looked at her mother standing behind her. She looked back at the boy. "My mom?" He nodded. She frowned. "Why?" The boy's eyes moved to the school gate. He stood very still, watching, as if waiting for something. Then he looked back at Sophia. "I'll tell you after the race." The whistle blew before Sophia could ask anything else. Across the field, the annual school sports day burst into motion. Children rushed toward parents, mothers bent down to tie shoelaces, fathers adjusted race ribbons. Teachers moved through the chaos with clipboards and megaphones, calling for every child to find their partner. The boy did not move. He stood exactly where he was, small and still and upright, his eyes drifting once more to the school gate, waiting for something that was not arriving. Celestine had heard everything. She had come to Sunnyside Primary School Sports Day with a bag full of snacks, 2 extra bottles of water, a folding chair she had carried from the car on her own, and the specific happiness of a mother who had decided in advance that this afternoon was going to be a good memory. She had not come expecting a small boy with perfectly pressed trousers to ask her daughter for permission to borrow her. Sophia turned slowly and looked at her mother with an expression that said, "Well?" Celestine looked from her daughter to the boy. Everything about him was looked after. His uniform was clean, his shoes had been polished, his hair had been combed by someone who cared about the combing. And yet there was something about the way he kept watching the school gate with those patient, careful eyes that landed in Celestine's chest like a small stone dropping into still water. The teacher called again through the megaphone. "Parent and child partners, please come to the starting line for the 3-legged race." Sophia leaned close to her mother and whispered, "Can we let him borrow you?" The boy looked down immediately, as if he had not expected the question to be asked out loud. Celestine crouched in front of him. "What's your name, sweetheart?" He answered without hesitation, "Kang Si-woo." "Si-woo," she said it gently. "Are you sure your parent isn't on their way?" For the first time, something shifted in his face. Not dramatically, just a small tightening around his mouth, a brief flicker of something he was too young to have learned to hide completely. Then he looked at the gate once more. He promised. Celestine did not ask another question. Not yet. She held out her hand. "Until he arrives, you can race with us." Siwoo looked at her hand, then at Sophia. Sophia gave him one slow, serious nod, the nod of someone approving a very important piece of business. Borrowing officially accepted. Siwoo looked confused for exactly 1 second, then the smallest breath of something escaped him. Not quite a laugh, almost. A small, almost laugh from a child who had apparently decided almost was enough for now. They tied the ribbon around Sophia's ankle and Siwoo's ankle. Celestine steadied them both from behind, her hands at their shoulders. The teacher raised the whistle.
"Left foot first," Sophia whispered. "Your left or my left?" Siwoo whispered back. "There are 2 lefts." The whistle blew. They nearly went down on the very first step. Celestine caught them. Sophia started laughing before she had fully regained her balance. Siwoo looked startled, as if the sound had surprised him, as if laughter erupting that quickly and that easily in the middle of falling was something he had not encountered before. Then Sophia grabbed his hand and pulled him forward. "Come on, borrowed brother." "I'm not your brother." "Only until school closes." That time, something real happened. Siwoo laughed. Small and quick and almost accidental, like a sound that had escaped before he could decide whether to let it. but Celestine heard it, and for reasons she could not entirely explain, it made her throat tighten. They did not win the race. Sophia blamed the ribbon, Siwoo blamed coordination failure, Celestine blamed both of them for arguing during the actual running portion of a running race. For a few minutes, Siwoo forgot to look at the gate. Then it was over. Parents cheered, and children ran into arms, and cameras came out all across the field. Sophia dragged Siwoo toward the picnic blanket where Celestine had spread out their lunch. Siwoo stopped at the edge of the blanket. "No, thank you." Celestine opened the lunch bag. "Do you not like sandwiches?" "I didn't say that." He looked at the food. He looked at Sophia, who had already sat down and was patting the space beside her as if the matter were settled. He looked back at Celestine. "The food is for your family." Celestine took out a small plate and placed a sandwich on it, added fruit beside it, set a juice box against a corner. She did not push it toward him the way you push charity at someone. She set it down beside Sophia's plate, as though it had always been meant to be there, as though the arrangement had been planned from the beginning. "There's enough," she said. "Sit." Siwoo sat slowly. He picked up the sandwich with both hands and held it. He did not eat immediately. He simply looked at it for a moment. Celestine watched him. "Is something wrong?" He shook his head quickly. "No." "Then why aren't you eating?" His fingers tightened slightly around the bread. His voice went quieter. "Nobody has ever packed lunch for me before." Sophia stopped chewing. Celestine went completely still. The field was as loud as it had been a moment ago. Children shouted and parents laughed, and a teacher with a clipboard called out names somewhere to the left. But at that picnic blanket, everything became very quiet. Siwoo seemed to realize what he had said. He took a bite immediately. "It's good," he said, too politely and too fast, the way a child covers an accidental truth with a rapid compliment. Celestine looked away for exactly the time it took to steady her face. Beside her, Sophia quietly pushed her juice box toward Siwoo. "You can have mine too." Siwoo looked at it. "I already have one." "I know." "Then why are you giving it to me?" Sophia shrugged. "Because borrowed people need extra." A real smile touched Siwoo's face, small and surprised and real. And at that exact moment, across the school field, a black luxury car turned into the parking lot. It was too dark and too silent and too expensive to belong beside school buses and family hatchbacks. Several parents looked over. Siwoo heard the engine before he saw the car. The smile left his face. Celestine noticed. The car stopped near the gate. A tall Korean man stepped out. He was wearing a dark suit, phone still in one hand, his expression controlled in the practiced way of someone who had learned to control it. But his eyes were moving across the field with an urgency that his face was not quite managing to hide. And the moment they found Siwoo, something that looked very much like relief crossed through them. He started walking toward the picnic blanket. Any child who had waited all afternoon for a parent would have run. Siwoo did not run. He stayed exactly where he was, the sandwich still in his hands, and watched his father walk toward him with the particular stillness of a child who had learned to be patient. Celestine looked from the man to the boy, then back again, and the question that had begun with one small, strange sentence was becoming something considerably larger. Why would a child who had been watching the gate all afternoon not run to his father when his father finally came? For a few seconds, neither of them moved. Hein-suk saw one thing clearly. His 8-year-old son was holding a sandwich someone else made for him. Relief came first. Guilt followed immediately. He crossed the last of the distance and crouched in front of Siwoo. "I'm sorry," he said. No explanation, no traffic, no blame for the meeting. Just those 2 words, plain and direct. Siwoo looked at him for a moment, then gave one small nod. He'd been disappointed before, enough times to know his father never broke promises on purpose. That understanding was somehow worse than anger. A child should not have to be that gracious about being let down. Before they left, Siwoo turned to Celestine and Sophia and bowed, small and formal and genuine. "Thank you for letting me borrow your family." Celestine smiled. "And thank you for returning our borrowed mom before school closed." Something shifted in the air. Siwoo almost smiled. Almost. Hyunsuk introduced himself quietly. He thanked Celestine for looking after his son. He apologized for the interruption. She studied him for a moment. This man she had built a certain picture of when she saw the car pulling in. The picture was not what she had expected. This was not a cold, remote man. This was simply a father who had arrived too late and knew it. As they turned to go, Celestine said something she had not planned to say. Children don't remember expensive days. They remember happy ones. Hyunsuk didn't answer, but he didn't forget it either. The black car moved through the afternoon traffic in quiet. Siwoo sat beside the window with the extra juice box Sophia had insisted he keep, held in both hands. Hyunsuk drove without much conversation. He kept his eyes on the road and tried to think of questions to ask his son, and found, with a surprise that was also a small kind of grief, that he wasn't sure which ones would land. 20 minutes later, the iron gates of the Kang estate opened automatically. Beyond them, the house sat exactly where it always sat, enormous and immaculate and perfectly arranged. Sculpted hedges, a fountain that made exactly the right sound, gravel that had been raked that morning, everything in its place, everything quiet. The front door opened before the car fully stopped. 2 elderly household staff members were already waiting, gentle and punctual, their routines unchanged and unchanging. One took Siwoo's bag, another reminded him that piano practice began in 30 minutes. A third asked about his afternoon snack preference and mentioned that his vitamin schedule had been adjusted per his doctor's recommendation. Everything exactly on time, every single day. As Siwoo started toward the staircase, one of the staff called gently after him, "Young master, the banister." He touched it as he climbed. He already knew. He let out a breath so small only he heard it. He wondered sometimes, not unkindly, whether everything in this house was managed or whether anything in it was simply lived in. That evening, Hyunsuk sat in his study with documents he was not reading. His assistant, Jin, placed a new folder on the desk and noticed his employer staring at the window. "Sir," Hyunsuk looked up, "you've mentioned the woman from the school 3 times this evening. I asked a single question." Jin kept a straight face. "You asked 3, sir." Hyunsuk had no reply. He turned back to the window. "Did Siwoo seem different to you today?" Jin answered without hesitation. "He laughed, sir." The study was quiet. After a moment, Hyunsuk spoke without moving. "I haven't heard that in a while." Jin chose his next words carefully. "Some things can't be hired, sir." The study remained quiet. Hyunsuk already knew the rest of the sentence himself. The history of the Kang household was not complicated, it was simply painful. His ex-wife, Soo-jin's betrayal had not been the deepest wound. The deepest wound had come after, when she discovered she had been passing information from inside the house to people outside it. Schedules, conversations, details of Siwoo's routine, all of it while Hyunsuk was traveling, quietly collected and delivered. The marriage ended. Full custody went to him, and after that, trust in anyone young enough to be strategic became something Hyunsuk could not afford. Every young caregiver was replaced. Every replacement was elderly, careful, devoted. They loved Siwoo faithfully. They fed him, protected him, structured his days. But somewhere in the years since, the house had stopped being inhabited. It was only administered. The next morning, Siwoo was quiet through breakfast. He ate at the right pace, answered Mrs. Lee's questions about the previous day, sat with the straightened posture that had been gently encouraged for as long as he could remember. Then he looked at his father across the breakfast table. "Dad, can I visit Sophia?" The dining room went still in the particular way of rooms where something unexpected has been said very calmly. Mrs. Lee looked at Hyunsuk. The other staff member near the pantry stopped what she was doing. It was not an expensive request, it was not a complicated one, and yet it sat in the room like something significant. Hyunsuk looked at his son for a long moment. He had been prepared for toy requests, game requests, model set requests. He had not been prepared for his son to ask for an afternoon with a girl he had known for less than one day. He nodded slowly. All right. A small smile appeared on Siwoo's face, gone almost as quickly as it came. He lowered his head and continued eating. But something had already changed. For the first time in a very long while, he was looking forward to something he couldn't order or deliver. Hyunsuk drove Siwoo to school himself that morning. At the school gate, Celestine was arriving with Sophia, who saw Siwoo first. "My borrowed brother." Siwoo looked at her with his usual composure. "I'm still not your brother." Sophia smiled. "We'll fix that eventually." Celestine greeted Hyunsuk politely. He returned it with the same quiet respect. They had met only the afternoon before, but something about two children sharing a race and a juice box and one unrepeatable afternoon had already made strangers feel less strange. Hyunsuk came directly to the point. Siwoo asked if he could visit after school. Celestine looked at Siwoo. He stood beside his father, not quite at attention but close, waiting. She smiled. "Of course." Sophia clapped once. "Borrowed brother is coming." The bell rang. Both children moved toward the school entrance together. Halfway there, Sophia was already telling Siwoo something with considerable use of her hands. Siwoo mostly listened, but he was walking beside her, not behind her, not alone. Hyunsuk noticed the difference. It stayed with him longer than he expected. That afternoon, Hyunsuk drove Siwoo himself, no driver, only Jin. For a man who had spent years building walls after being burned inside his own home, leaving his son in a stranger's house on the first visit was simply not something he could do. So he drove, and he stayed. Celestine's house was nothing like the Kang estate. There were no iron gates, no fountain, no raked gravel. There were flower boxes beside the front steps, with something purple and slightly overgrown in them. There were children's drawings taped inside one of the front windows. There was a vegetable garden running along the side of the house that looked like it had started organized and become something more personal over time. The moment the front door opened, Siwoo noticed two things immediately. The first was the noise, soft music from somewhere, a pot doing something on the stove, Sophia dropping her backpack in the hallway without anyone commenting on the sound. The second was the smell, butter, something with maple in it, something warm. On the dining table sat a plate of pancakes with a bowl of fruit beside them. Sophia's eyes found them at the exact same moment Siwoo did. She glanced toward the hallway and lowered her voice. "Grandpa Ray made those." Siwoo looked at the plate. "Shouldn't we ask first?" Sophia stared at him with the expression of someone encountering a suggestion so unreasonable she doesn't know where to begin. "If we ask first, he says no." She took one pancake and pushed it into Siwoo's hand before he could respond. He froze. She took one for herself. He looked toward Celestine. She was in the kitchen getting drinks and had not seen the exchange. He looked toward his father. Hyunsuk was standing near the doorway, quietly taking in the small, busy house. Siwoo looked back at the pancake. He took one careful bite. His eyes widened. Sophia smiled, the smile of someone whose argument has just been proven without words. That was when heavy footsteps came from the hallway. An elderly man appeared carrying a grocery bag in one arm and a look of cheerful suspicion on his face. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with silver hair pointing in no particular direction, as if it had been involved in something active and had not fully recovered. A faded canvas apron covered most of his clothes. Flour covered both hands, one sleeve, and what appeared to be a significant portion of his left eyebrow. He stopped in the doorway, counted the pancakes on the plate once, then again. His bright eyes moved to Sophia, then to Siwoo, then to the evidence of the missing pancakes with the slow deliberateness of a man presenting a case. Silence. One flour-covered finger raised slowly. "Who touched my pancakes?" Sophia pointed at Siwoo without a moment's hesitation. It was the borrowed brother. Siwoo's eyes went wide. "You put them in my hand." The old man gasped. "So we have a thief and an accomplice?" Sophia laughed and ran. For 1 second, Siwoo stood completely still. Then the old man took one dramatic step forward, and Siwoo ran too. The elderly man chased both children through the small back garden at a speed that was genuinely alarming, his apron flying, the flowers still perfectly in place on his eyebrow, a wooden spoon raised at an angle that suggested he had used it for more than cooking. Siwoo glanced back over his shoulder, genuinely startled. Old people can run. The man finally stopped near the garden fence, leaning on his knees, breathing steadily, the flowers still perfectly in place on his eyebrow. He looked at Siwoo with the expression of someone making an assessment. "You're fast." Siwoo answered honestly. "I thought you were going to catch me." The old man offended. "Catch you?" He straightened slowly. "I was protecting my knees." Sophia burst out laughing. "You were losing." The man folded his arms with the dignity of someone who has simply decided to have a different account of events. "I was demonstrating mercy." He paused. "I've reached an age where I allow children to believe they're winning." He looked at the kitchen window, at the half-empty pancake plate inside, and then at both children with the expression of a judge returning to the bench. "Now, the accused will please step forward." Siwoo quietly raised his hand. "I ate one." The man studied him for a long moment, deeply impressed. "I like this one," he said, "confesses before I've even opened the investigation." He extended one flour-dusted hand to Hyunsuk. "I'm Raymond, but don't call me Grandpa. It affects my blood pressure. Call me Ray." Before Hyunsuk could respond, Sophia said, "Okay, Grandpa Ray." Raymond closed his eyes briefly. His expression suggested he knew this was going to happen and had prepared himself for it, and the preparation had not helped. Celestine appeared from the kitchen with drinks, spotted her father, and said, "I'm sorry, he treats everyone like a court case." Raymond looked genuinely puzzled. "I don't treat anyone like a court case. I simply present the available evidence." He looked at Hyunsuk. "You'll get used to this." Hyunsuk had no response for this. Then Siwoo laughed. A real one, not the polite, brief laugh he produced when adults seemed to expect it, not the almost laugh from the sports field. A real one, surprised out of him by an old man in a flower-covered apron who chased him around the garden in defense of pancakes. Raymond looked at him with an expression that was entirely different from the one he had been wearing a moment ago, something warmer and quieter. He caught Celestine's eye across the garden. She gave a small nod. He gave one back.
The visits became routine without anyone deciding they would. Nobody announced it, nobody wrote it into a schedule. It simply happened. The way things happen that should have happened sooner. Some afternoons, after piano and homework and all the things that had to be done, Siwoo would find Hyunsuk and ask the same quiet question. "Can we go to Sophia's?" Hyunsuk always pretended to think about it. Then he always nodded. One Saturday, Raymond appeared in the back garden carrying 3 water guns of dramatically different sizes and set them on the grass with the ceremony of someone presenting gifts at a summit. "Championship rules," he announced. Sophia picked hers up. "What are the rules?" Raymond held up one finger. "First person to surrender loses." Siwoo looked at the guns. "Why is yours the biggest?" Raymond looked at it as if genuinely surprised. "Experience." "That's not a rule." "It is now." Sophia was already filling hers at the garden tap. Siwoo moved beside her and whispered, "We go at the same time." She whispered back, "On 3." Raymond was still presenting additional championship rules to the general area. Double points for accuracy, which naturally favors the more experienced. 1, Siwoo whispered. 2, Sophia whispered. Raymond turned around. "Now, any questions before we—" The water hit him from both sides at the same moment. He gasped and stepped back. His feet slipped slightly on the grass wet. He grabbed the fence post, missed it, grabbed it again, and managed to remain upright with the specific determination of a man who has decided dignity is non-negotiable. Both children reloaded immediately. "Surrender!" Sophia shouted. Raymond straightened, water dripping steadily from his apron, his silver hair completely flat against his face. He took a moment. Then, "I do not surrender." Siwoo looked at him with great seriousness.
Grandpa Ray, your situation is difficult. Raymond wiped water from his eyes with a calm that suggested he was simply absorbing information. He paused. That was chapter 1. Both children groaned. They soaked him again. A little while later, the smell of burnt pancakes drifted out from the kitchen. It reached the garden before anyone said a word. Raymond lifted his nose, sniffed once, turned to the children with the expression of a scientist noting a result. Charcoal. Celestine appeared at the back door holding a spatula. They are not charcoal, they're rustic. Raymond turned to the children with the slow gravity of someone presenting evidence that has been building for years. 15 years, every single Saturday. Rustic. Saiwu looked at Sophia. Sophia shook her head slowly. Don't get involved. Celestine pointed the spatula at her father. You're welcome to make them yourself. Raymond's expression changed. Something lit up in it that clearly been waiting a long time for exactly those words. He walked past her into the kitchen without another syllable, retying his apron with the quiet confidence of a man returning to his correct position in the world. Celestine looked at the children. Don't say a word. Saiwu pressed his lips together very carefully. Sophia looked at the sky. Near the kitchen doorway, Hyunsuk watched the whole exchange. He hadn't noticed Jin appear beside him. Sir? Hyunsuk didn't look away from the kitchen. What? You're smiling. I'm observing. Jin nodded. Of course, sir. A pause. You've been observing for 50 minutes. Hyunsuk looked at him. Jin looked back with complete professional serenity. On the counter beside Hyunsuk was a cup of coffee. Celestine's coffee from Celestine's kitchen, which he had apparently accepted without noticing when she handed it to him. Jin looked at the cup, then at his employer, said nothing. Hyunsuk picked it up, took a sip, said nothing. Jin clasped his hands behind his back. I haven't said anything, sir. He paused. I am simply observing.
That same afternoon, while the children raced each other through the garden, Hyunsuk stood beside Raymond near the fence. For a while, neither of them spoke. They simply watched. Eventually, Hyunsuk broke the quiet. How did you raise someone like Celestine? Raymond smiled, without looking away from the garden. I stopped trying to raise a perfect child. He watched his daughter try to catch Sophia before she ran through the tomatoes again. I just made sure she always knew she was loved. The sentence was simple. It had no drama in it, but it found a place somewhere in Hyunsuk's chest and settled there in a way he hadn't expected. He had given Siwoo everything he could identify as a need. A perfect house, perfect safety, every routine designed by professionals who knew what children were supposed to have. He had solved every problem he could see and protected against every risk he could name. He had never stopped to ask what his son actually felt. That same night, after the house had gone quiet, Celestine stepped out onto the front porch. She sat down on the old wooden swing by herself, in the particular stillness of someone thinking with their whole body. A few minutes later, Raymond appeared with 2 mugs of tea. He handed her one without a question, without a comment, and sat beside her. They listened to the garden settling into evening. Finally, Celestine said, Sometimes I wonder if I'm doing enough for Sophia. Raymond smiled. When you were small, I had the same worry. Celestine looked at him. You? Every single day, he said simply. He took a sip. Good parents aren't the ones with all the answers. They're the ones who keep showing up. Petra looked down at her mug. The worry didn't disappear. It just felt lighter. In the weeks before all of this, Siwoo had moved through the schedule of his days without counting them. Now he counted the days until the next visit. Mrs. Lee noticed first. He hummed on the staircase. He smiled to himself for no reason anyone could identify. One afternoon, she heard him laughing quietly in his room, replaying something only he could hear. She stood outside his door for a moment, then she smiled to herself and walked away. The mansion was still quiet, but it no longer felt the same kind of quiet. Hyunsuk was changing too, in ways that were slower and less visible, but just as real. He stayed longer after dropping Siwoo off.
One evening, Celestine handed him coffee from the kitchen without asking. He accepted it without thinking. They stood together on the back porch, watching the children sprint across the garden. After a long quiet, Celestine said, "You schedule everything." He glanced at her. "Responsibilities require schedules." She watched Sophia trip over the garden hose and recover without stopping. Children don't schedule happiness, they just notice when it's there. Hyun-suk said nothing, but he didn't look away from Siwoo, who was running and laughing and not, for once, watching the clock. Then Raymond appeared at the garden tap, turned it on to refill a watering can, and managed to spray himself directly in the face. Both arms went out. He grabbed the fence, missed the fence, grabbed it again, straightened with extraordinary composure. He looked at the tap. He looked at the children who had both stopped running to stare at him. He said with great dignity, "I meant to do that."
Sophia sat down on the grass and laughed until she couldn't breathe. Siwoo put his hand over his mouth. He lasted approximately 1 second. Then, without planning it, without even noticing it was happening, Hyun-suk laughed too. A real one. Raymond turned from the garden tap slowly. A wide, unhurried smile crossed his face. "There you are," he said. He said it quietly, more to himself than to anyone else. "I was beginning to wonder when we'd get to meet you." Hyun-suk had no answer for this. Nobody noticed the car parked at the far end of the road, engine off, dark windows. Soojin sat completely still inside it. She had been there for 20 minutes. Her son was in that garden, laughing, running, reaching for other people the way he used to reach for her before she made the choices she made. She had told herself for years that Siwoo was fine, that Hyun-suk was the problem, that her son still needed her in a way that justified everything. But the boy in that garden didn't look like a child who was missing something. He looked like a child who had found something she had never thought to give him. A fear settled into her chest that was quieter than anger and colder than loss. She wasn't losing an argument, she was losing her place. She started the engine and drove away slowly. The laughter in the garden continued long after her taillights disappeared. It was a Saturday like the others. Raymond was in the garden making everyone laugh. Siwoo and Sophia were helping with the tomato plants, which mostly meant arguing about which tomatoes were ready and which needed more time. Celestine was inside making pancakes. Nobody expected the afternoon to change. The front gate slammed open. 2 men walked in without knocking, without hesitating, without looking at anything except the direction they were heading. One of them knocked over a plant pot without glancing at it. The other pushed through the small wooden garden gate as though it were not there. Raymond straightened. His voice was level. "Can I help you?" The taller man didn't look at him. "We're looking for the woman." Celestine stepped onto the back porch, wiping flour from her hands. She had heard the gate. "I'm here." The second man pointed toward the street. "Walk away from this family. You don't belong here." Celestine looked from one man to the other, slowly. "I think you need to leave." "We're not asking." Sophia moved behind her mother. Siwoo stepped instinctively beside Raymond. He was still holding the small garden trowel he'd been using. He didn't look at it. He watched. The taller man stepped forward toward the porch. Raymond moved in front of him. "That's far enough." The man looked at the elderly man in the flour-dusted apron standing in the path between him and the porch. He laughed. He shoved Raymond hard. Raymond's heel caught the edge of the garden path. He went down. The wooden spoon hit the stones and skipped. For 1 frozen second, the entire garden held its breath. Then Siwoo moved. He crossed the garden in 4 quick steps and dropped to his knees beside Raymond. "Grandpa Ray," his voice did not shake. "Can you sit up?" Raymond looked at him. Something moved through his eyes. "Yes," he said. "Good." Without thinking about it, Siwoo slipped both hands under Raymond's arm and helped him to his feet. Celestine had already reached the rolling pin by the kitchen door. She picked it up. She said nothing. Her expression said everything she needed to say. The taller man stepped forward again. Raymond was already standing. His apron was dirty. His shoulder hurt. His eyes were completely calm. "You do not touch my daughter," he said. The man rushed at him. Raymond grabbed the nearest plastic garden chair with both hands, pivoted, and swung it once.
The chair caught the man across the shoulder. He stumbled sideways. His feet went out from under him on the wet grass. He went down on his back. Before he could rise, Raymond sat on him. He folded his arms. "There now, stay." The man struggled. Raymond didn't move. "I have been gardening since 6:30 this morning," he said, in the tone of someone explaining something mildly interesting. "I am considerably heavier than I appear to be." Sophia was staring from the porch. "Grandpa Ray," she could barely get the words out. "Did you just sit on him?" Raymond considered the question seriously. "I prefer the term measured de-escalation." Celestine almost laughed. The second man looked around. Neighbors had opened their doors. Someone shouted that the police were already on their way. His confidence dissolved. He ran. The gate banged behind him. The man on the ground stopped struggling, partly because Raymond had made himself comfortable and showed no particular sign of moving. "You had one job," Raymond said conversationally. "Leave." He looked down at the man. "You selected a different chapter instead." The black car turned into the street before the police arrived. It stopped hard. Hyunsuk was out before it fully stopped. Jin was half a second behind him. Both of them had spent the entire drive expecting the worst. Instead, they found Raymond sitting on a man in the garden with the specific composure of someone who has simply made a decision and is committed to it. His apron was dirty, his hair had new things in it, his expression was entirely peaceful. Jin stopped walking. He stared. He carefully cleared his throat. "Sir," Hyunsuk looked at him. "It appears Grandpa Ray has resolved the situation." The tension that had been holding Hyunsuk since his phone rang cracked open. He crossed the garden in 3 long steps. His eyes moved fast. Celestine, Sophia, Raymond, Siwoo. His son met his eyes and gave one small nod. "I'm okay." Hyunsuk exhaled for the first time since his phone rang. Then he looked at Siwoo properly. The boy was not hiding behind anyone. He was standing beside Raymond with his chin up and his eyes clear. And he looked, Hyunsuk realized, completely unfrightened. He looked, for the first time, like someone who knew where he stood. Police sirens approached down the road. Raymond patted the man's shoulder almost kindly. "I did give you fair warning." The man didn't last long under questioning. He wasn't dangerous. He was simply hired. His phone contained everything investigators needed: messages, recordings, bank transfers, all of it, pointing to the same person and the same direction. Soo-jin walked into the police station with her chin up and her composure assembled, as though she was arriving for a meeting that would resolve itself quickly. Instead, a phone was placed on the table. A recording began. Her own voice filled the room. "Don't hurt anyone, just frighten them, especially the woman." Her composure cracked at the edges. That recording could be... The investigator set the bank transfer records beside it. She adjusted her direction. "I only wanted to..." The messages followed. Every exit she moved toward closed before she reached it. She looked across the table at Hyunsuk. He had said nothing since she walked in. He simply sat there and let the evidence say what he wouldn't. The investigator stood. "You're under arrest." As officers rose beside her, Soo-jin looked at Hyunsuk one last time. "She's replacing me?" It was barely a question. Hyunsuk answered anyway. "No." His voice was quiet and completely even. "You lost that place yourself." Soo-jin looked down. For the first time, the thing underneath all the other things surfaced. She hadn't been afraid of Celestine. She had been afraid of what she saw in that garden. Her son, laughing freely, reaching for other people without hesitation, trusting a family she had never built for him. She hadn't lost custody years ago. She had lost his trust, slowly, without noticing, until one afternoon on a sports field, she watched from a parked car and saw that it was already gone. That evening, everyone gathered at Celestine's house. The broken flower pot had been swept aside, the damaged gate leaned against the fence. The garden was quieter than it usually was. Raymond sat on the porch steps with one arm around each child. checking on them every few minutes the way someone checks a door they want to make sure is still holding. Hyun-suk stood near the damaged fence for a long time. Celestine walked over. "You didn't have to come back tonight." He looked at the gate, at the garden, at the children sitting on the steps, a little quieter than usual, leaning into Raymond. "Yes, I did." Celestine was quiet. "Why?" He looked at Siwoo. Siwoo was sitting close to Sophia, not hiding, not frightened, simply exactly where he felt safest. "Because this is the first place my son has ever looked like he was home." The words landed between them softly. Neither of them moved. The sentence didn't ask for anything. It just needed to be heard, and it had been. The next morning, workers arrived to install new gates, cameras, better lighting, a security system that was unobtrusive and complete. Celestine stood at the kitchen window watching them work. When Hyun-suk came inside, she handed him coffee without speaking. He accepted it without thinking. "I never asked for any of this," she said. "I know." He looked out at the workers. "I'm not protecting a house." He looked at her. "I'm protecting the people inside it." Celestine held her cup with both hands, looked down at it for a moment, and said nothing. But something in her shoulders changed, very slightly, the way something changes when a weight you have been carrying alone for a long time is quietly set beside you without being asked for. Several weeks later, late in the evening, Hyun-suk sat alone in his home office. A document waited on the desk. He hadn't looked at it. Instead, he had opened the security camera feed on his laptop and sat with it in the quiet. Raymond was in the middle of a story. "Naturally," he was saying, "this reminds me of something from 1988. Three voices groaned: Sophia, Siwoo, Celestine. Raymond smiled. "Fine, 1989. Sophia laughed. Celestine tried to prevent everyone from eating the biscuits she'd set out before dinner. Nobody listened. Siwoo took one with both hands and ate it with his eyes on Raymond, waiting for the next sentence. Then he heard it. His son's laugh, full and unguarded and free, the kind of laugh that doesn't know it's being listened to. He sat without moving. His hand came up slowly and covered his mouth. Then, almost too quietly to be a sound at all, I forgot what his laugh sounded like. The office was completely still. Outside, the city went on being a city. Inside, a father sat alone with a screen full of laughter and the quiet understanding that the most valuable thing he had ever done for his son was drive him to a small house with flower boxes and burnt Saturday pancakes and an old man who had never once in his life let a happy afternoon be wasted. That evening, Raymond called Siwoo out to the porch steps. He sat beside him without saying anything. They looked at the garden together. The tomatoes, the repaired fence, the small flat patch of grass that still showed where the water gun championship had been decided. Then Raymond reached into his apron pocket and placed a worn notebook in Siwoo's hands. Siwoo looked at it, then at Raymond. "I can't take this." Raymond smiled. "I already filled it." Siwoo opened the first page. Across the top, in large, careful handwriting, "The day a small boy borrowed a family." His throat tightened. He turned the pages slowly. Small memories filled every line. Sophia blamed the borrowed brother for the missing pancakes immediately. Old people are faster than they appear to be. First real laugh, sports field, second race, shared juice box, water gun championship, outcome disputed by unreliable witnesses. Many more. Then, near the last page, he asked for a notebook on the second visit. He didn't show me what he wrote on the first page. I think I already know. Siwoo read that line twice. He closed the notebook carefully and held it against his chest. Then, without saying a word, he leaned into Raymond's side. Raymond put one arm around him. Neither of them said anything. The garden was quiet. The evening light was almost done. Everything that mattered had already been written down. After a long while, Raymond spoke very quietly. "One day you'll forget the dates." Siwoo listened. "You'll forget the weather." He tapped the notebook once, gently, where it rested against Siwoo's chest. "But don't forget how this felt." Siwoo nodded. He didn't trust his voice enough for more than that. Petra found Hyunsuk standing near the garden fence a little while later. He was watching through the kitchen window. Siwoo was at the table inside, the notebook open in front of him, writing something on a page with careful, slow handwriting. Celestine stood beside Hyunsuk. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then she said quietly, "Thank you." Hyunsuk shook his head. "You gave him what I couldn't." "You let him come here," she said. "A man who trusted nobody." She said it gently. That wasn't nothing. Hyunsuk looked at her. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The kitchen light fell across her face. He noticed things he had been careful not to notice before. The way she spoke about his son as though she had already made room for him. The way she was still standing here at the end of it all and still finding something generous to say. Something moved in his chest, something quiet and warm and unfamiliar. He had almost formed a sentence around it when Raymond's voice came through the back door with the force of a weather event. "Celestine, if you're finished abandoning your elderly father, I have an announcement." Celestine looked away first. She pressed her lips together. Hyunsuk exhaled slowly. From the far corner of the garden, Jin appeared to find the evening sky extremely interesting. Inside, one of Sophia's eyes opened briefly, then closed, smiling. Raymond was standing in the middle of the garden when they came back outside, arms folded, expression deeply serious. The expression of a man who has been building to something for some time and has decided the time has arrived. "I have been thinking," he announced. Sophia looked at Siwoo. Siwoo looked at Sophia. Neither of them moved. Raymond looked at Siwoo directly. "You came here to borrow a mother." Siwoo nodded carefully. "And then you borrowed a sister." Sophia grinned. "And a grandfather." Raymond raised one finger. "I prefer Ray." "Grandpa Ray," Sophia corrected immediately. "Strike." Raymond closed his eyes for a moment. Then he looked back at Siwoo. "So, are you done borrowing?" Siwoo was quiet for exactly 1 second. Then Sophia spoke for him. "Can I keep my borrowed brother?" Siwoo looked at her. "Only if I can keep borrowing the family." Raymond's voice came immediately. "No borrowing." Everyone looked at him. He smiled, the kind of smile a person gets when they have been waiting a long time to say the exact right thing and have finally arrived at the moment. "We're keeping everybody." Nobody spoke, nobody moved. Hyunsuk quietly placed one hand on Siwoo's shoulder. Siwoo looked at his father, then at Sophia, then at Celestine, then at Raymond, who was standing in the garden in his flower-dusted apron in the fading evening light, looking like someone who has made a decision that is going to require no further discussion. And for the first time in a very long time, Siwoo smiled without it disappearing. If this story stayed with you from the sports field all the way to that garden in the evening, thank you for being here for all of it. Drop a comment and tell me which moment got to you. Was it the borrowed juice box, Grandpa Ray sitting on a man in the garden, or the notebook on the last page? I read every single one. Subscribe so you're there when the next story drops. And share this with someone who needs a reminder that some families aren't the ones you're born into. They're the ones who show up on a Tuesday afternoon and simply make room.